My own family told me I was the toxic one. They said I was dramatic, oversensitive, ungrateful, a problem. And for a long time, a really long time, I believed them. So I did something terrifying. I went completely silent for 30 days. No calls, no texts, no visits, no explaining myself. And what those 30 days taught me completely changed how I see myself, my family, and what love is actually supposed to feel like. Before I get into everything, I want to say something important up front. This is not a video about hating family. This is not about getting revenge or playing victim or cancelling people I grew up with. This is an honest account of what happened when I stopped performing for people who were never going to applaud me anyway. And I know some of you watching this right now are in a situation that feels impossible. You love your family. You would do anything for them. And yet somehow every single family gathering ends with you in the bathroom crying, or driving home in silence replaying everything that was said, or lying awake at 2 a.m. wondering if you're crazy. You are not crazy, but you might be in a dynamic that is costing you your peace. And today, I want to talk about that specifically, what happened when I decided to step out of that dynamic for exactly 30 days, and what it taught me about love, guilt, identity, and healing. So let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment that broke me, the moment that finally pushed me to do something I never thought I'd have the strength to do. Let's call it the breaking point. It wasn't one big thing. That's what people don't understand about toxic family situations. People expect there to be some dramatic moment, a plate thrown across the room, some unforgivable word, one explosive scene that makes the decision obvious. But most of the time it doesn't happen like that. It's 1,000 small cuts. It's the comment at Christmas dinner that everyone laughs at, but you go home and cry about. It's being talked over, undermined, compared to other siblings or cousins in ways that are meant to motivate you, but only ever make you feel like you'll never be enough. It's the way certain family members can enter a room and immediately, without saying a single word, make your shoulders tense up and your stomach drop. For me, it was all of that, years and years of all of that. But there was one specific day that became my breaking point, and I'm going to tell you about it because I think a lot of you will recognize yourselves in this story. It was a Sunday, family lunch, the kind that sounds warm and cozy in theory, you know, everyone gathered around a big table, food everywhere, people catching up. And for the first few minutes it actually was fine. I was hopeful like I always was. Every single time I'd walk into that house thinking, maybe today will be different, maybe today I'll leave feeling good. I never did. About 20 minutes in, the comments started. Nothing screaming or shouting. That's not how it works in families like mine. It's subtler than that. It was a joke about my weight. A comment about my job that made it sound like a failure, even though I was genuinely proud of what I was building. A comparison to a cousin who, according to everyone at that table, was doing everything right. And then the one thing that cracked me open completely. I said something, I shared something I was excited about, something I had worked really hard on, something that mattered to me. And one of them, someone who was supposed to love me unconditionally, looked at me with everyone watching and said, "You always make everything about yourself, don't you?" And everyone laughed. I didn't say anything, I smiled, I looked down at my plate, and I sat there for 2 more hours because leaving early would have caused even more drama. But on the drive home I was shaking. Not from anger, from grief. Because I realized something in that moment. I had been shrinking myself for years, making myself smaller, quieter, less enthusiastic, less me, trying to fit into a mold they were comfortable with. And it still wasn't enough. I could disappear completely and it still wouldn't be enough. That was my breaking point. Not the comment, the realization that nothing I did would ever change the dynamic. I was not the problem to be solved. I was the outlet for other people's unprocessed pain. And I had been letting it happen for decades. That night I made a decision. Let me be very clear about something. This was not an impulsive decision. I didn't send a dramatic text at midnight. I didn't make a big announcement. I didn't blow anything up. I want to say that because I think a lot of people imagine cutting off family as this big, explosive confrontation, a final speech, a door slam, some cinematic goodbye. That's not what happened. What happened was much quieter, and in some ways much harder. I decided to go completely no contact for 30 days, just 30 days. I told myself it was an experiment, a reset, a chance to hear my own thoughts without the constant noise of other people's opinions and expectations. I chose 30 days because it was long enough to actually feel a difference, but short enough to feel manageable. I wasn't saying never again. I was saying not right now, not today. Here's what no contact looked like for me specifically. I did not answer phone calls from certain family members. If they called, I let it go to voicemail. I did not respond to texts. I did not initiate any contact. If someone reached out through another family member to relay messages, which happened, by the way, and I'll get to that, I didn't engage with that either. And I did not explain myself. That last part was the hardest, because my instinct is deeply trained. Years in the making instinct was to manage everyone's feelings, to cushion the blow, to say, I just need a little space, or I'm going through something, in a way that made sure no one was upset with me. I didn't do that this time. I just went quiet. And the response was almost immediate. Within 48 hours my phone was exploding. Not because anyone was checking in on how I was doing, let me be crystal clear about that. The messages were not, "Are you okay? We're worried about you." They were, "Why are you ignoring everyone? This is so disrespectful. You think you're better than us now. You're being so dramatic. After everything we've done for you." And then came the emissaries, the family members who don't have direct conflict with you, but who get recruited to reach out on behalf of the ones who do. "Hey, just checking in, your family member is really hurt. We're all a little worried about the way you're handling this. You know, the family just wants to understand what's going on." I want to pause here for a second and name what this is, because I think naming it is important. This is called a flying monkey dynamic, which comes from psychology, from the study of narcissistic family systems. When someone in a family can't access you directly, they recruit others to do it for them. And the goal isn't genuinely to check on your well-being. The goal is to pull you back into contact so the dynamic can continue. I didn't respond to any of it. And honestly, that silence, that non-response, told me more about the health of these relationships than years of conversations ever had. Because here's the thing, if the primary reaction to you setting a boundary is anger, escalation, or guilt tripping, that reaction is the information. Healthy relationships can survive someone saying, "I need some space right now." Toxic ones can't. They need constant access to you to function. So day 1 was hard, days 2 through 4 were harder. And then came the guilt. I want to spend a lot of time here, because I think this is the part that most people don't talk about honestly enough. Everyone talks about cutting off toxic family like it's empowering, like you wake up one day and just decide, and then suddenly you feel free and light and liberated. And eventually that can be true. But week one is brutal. Week 1 is lying in bed at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, wondering if you've made a terrible mistake. Week 1 is your brain running through every possible scenario in which you are, in fact, the bad guy in this story. Week 1 is picking up your phone to call them back approximately 40 times and putting it down 41 times. The guilt was overwhelming. And the guilt sounded like this. What if they actually need me? What if something happens to one of them and the last thing between us is silence? What if I'm overreacting? What if I'm being too sensitive? What if they're right and I really am dramatic and I'm just making everything about myself? What kind of person cuts off their own family? Am I a bad person? That one was loudest. And I want to speak directly to whoever is watching this right now, who is in week 1 of their own version of this story. Whoever is lying awake asking themselves if they're a bad person. You are not a bad person for protecting your peace. I know that sounds simple. I know it sounds like something easy to say and hard to feel, but I need you to hear this. The guilt you feel, it's not evidence that you made the wrong choice. It's evidence of how deeply you were conditioned to put other people's comfort above your own well-being. The guilt is the training talking. The guilt is the result of spending years, maybe decades, in a system where your worth was tied to your ability to absorb, manage, and minimize the emotions of others. The guilt doesn't mean go back. But it also doesn't just go away on its own. So here's what I did to get through week 1. First, I journaled every single day. I gave myself a contained space to ask all the hard questions. Am I overreacting? Am I wrong? What am I actually feeling under all this noise? Without acting on any of it, the journal became my pressure valve. Second, I talked to a therapist. And I want to address something here. I know not everyone has access to therapy. I know it can be expensive and inaccessible for many people. But I want to name it because it genuinely helped me. If you can access it, please do. If you can't, there are free resources, books on family systems, online communities for people in no-contact situations, even YouTube videos like this one that can help you feel less alone. Third, and this one surprised me, I stopped consuming content that glorified family. Not because I was bitter, but because social media and film and television are absolutely saturated with imagery of warm, functional, loving families, and when you're in the middle of grieving the family you deserved but didn't have, that imagery is salt in a wound you didn't know was open. And fourth, I let myself grieve. That's the thing nobody prepares you for about cutting off a toxic family. Even when you know it's the right call, even when you know intellectually that this dynamic is hurting you, there is grief. Because what you're grieving isn't just the relationship you had, you're grieving the relationship you always wanted, the family you were supposed to have, the moments where someone was supposed to show up for you and didn't. That grief is real, it's valid, and it has to be felt before it can move through you. By the end of week 1 I hadn't healed, but I had stopped bleeding quite so much. And then something started to happen in week 2 that I genuinely did not expect. Around day 9 or 10 something shifted. It was small at first, almost imperceptible. I woke up one morning, and my first thought wasn't about them. It wasn't about the guilt, or the messages, or the imaginary conversations I kept rehearsing in my head, where I tried to explain myself in ways they might finally understand. My first thought was about something I wanted to do that day. Something just for me. And I remember lying there, staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling I'd been staring at anxiously and thinking, that was different. That was the beginning of the shift. Over the next week, I started noticing things I hadn't noticed before. Or more accurately, I started noticing things I'd been too exhausted to notice before. I was sleeping better, not a little better, dramatically better. I was falling asleep earlier, staying asleep, waking up without that immediate low-grade dread that I'd gotten so used to. I'd stopped noticing it was there. It was only in its absence that I realized how present it had always been. I was eating differently, more irregularly, more intentionally. When you're in a constant state of emotional stress, which is what toxic family dynamics create, your nervous system is in a near-permanent state of low-level threat response. Cortisol elevated, fight or flight engaged, and that affects everything: your appetite, your digestion, your immune system, your ability to concentrate. When the source of that stress was removed, even temporarily, my body started to recalibrate. I was more present in conversations with other people. Friends I'd been half listening to for months were suddenly getting the full, undistracted version of me, and they noticed. Several people commented that I seemed lighter, that I seemed more like myself. One friend said, "You seem like you've been on vacation, but like a real vacation, not the kind where you come back more tired than when you left." I laughed at that, and then I thought, I've never taken a real vacation from this. Because here's the truth about being in a toxic family dynamic: the exhaustion is so constant that you stop registering it as exhaustion. It becomes your baseline. You think this is just what life feels like. You think everyone feels this drained, this defensive, this on guard. You think the low hum of anxiety running through your body is just personality. It's not. It's the cost of maintaining relationships that are not safe for you. And when I removed that cost, even temporarily, I could feel the difference in my body before I could fully articulate it in words. Around day 14, I had a moment that I think about often. I was sitting outside in the early evening, nothing special, just on my front step, watching the light change, and I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten it was possible. I felt quiet. Not silent, not empty, not the numbness that sometimes masquerades as peace. I mean genuinely, organically, softly quiet inside. My mind wasn't racing. My body wasn't braced. I wasn't rehearsing anything or dreading anything or managing anything. I was just there, present in my own life, in my own body. And I started to cry. Not sad crying, something else, something that felt more like release, like a breath I'd been holding for 30 years finally leaving my body. I want to be careful here not to make this sound too easy or too poetic, because the reality is that weeks 2 and 3 also had hard days. There were moments where the guilt surged back, where the old voice, the one that sounds like them but has become so embedded that it sounds like me, would pipe up and say, "You're being selfish. You should call. This is childish." The difference was that now I had enough space to recognize that voice, to hear it and not automatically obey it, to say, "I hear you, but you're not the truth." That's what distance does. It gives your perspective. When you're in the water, you can't see the tide. When you step onto the shore, you can see exactly what's been pulling at you. And what I saw from the shore, from the outside, with 30+ years of patterns suddenly laid out in front of me like a map, was clarifying in a way I'm still processing. I saw that I had been trained from a very young age to believe that my worth was conditional, that love had to be earned constantly and could be revoked at any moment. Expressing a need was a weakness, that setting a limit was aggression, that the way to be safe was to make myself small, agreeable, and endlessly available to absorb whatever was being projected onto me. And I saw for the first time, truly saw, that none of that was true. None of it was ever true. That was weeks 2 and 3. That was the shift. By day 20, I was a different person than I'd been on day 1. Not a healed person. I want to be careful not to oversell this. Healing is not a 30-day process, but I was a more honest person, a more present person, a person who was beginning to understand in her body and not just her brain what it felt like to simply exist without performing. And then came day 30. The verdict. On the morning of day 30, I woke up, and I did something I hadn't done in 30 days. I sat with the question honestly, now what? Not what do I do about them, not how do I fix this, just what is true for me right now, what have I learned, and what do I want to do with what I've learned? Here's what I knew by day 30. I knew that the person I was when I walked into that family lunch a month ago, tense, braced, performing, shrinking, was not who I actually am. She was what I had learned to be to survive a specific environment. And while that version of me had kept me safe in a certain kind of way for a long time, she was also keeping me from living my actual life. I knew that the 30 days of silence had not solved anything in the family dynamic. They were still who they were. The patterns that had developed over decades were not going to dissolve because of 1 month of no contact. That's not how this works. But I also knew that I was different. And the I that would now enter any future interactions, if I chose to have them, was different, more grounded, more clear, more capable of maintaining a sense of self even in spaces that historically collapsed it. The question on day 30 wasn't, do I go back to how things were? I already knew the answer to that. No, absolutely not. That is not on the table. The real question was, what kind of relationship, if any, do I want to have with these people? And what would that relationship need to look like in order to be something I can participate in without losing myself? And here's my honest answer, the one I've thought about every day since. Some relationships I chose to keep with radically different boundaries. Visits became shorter, phone calls became less frequent. I stopped over-explaining, over-apologizing, and over-investing in people who weren't equally invested in me. I learned to be polite without being available, cordial without being close. Some relationships I chose to let go of, not in a dramatic way, not with a manifesto or a goodbye letter, but simply by continuing the quiet I'd found. Not every relationship is meant to continue forever. Some people are in your life until you grow in a direction they can't follow, and that's okay. Grieving that doesn't make it wrong. Would I do the 30 days again? Without hesitation, without a single moment of doubt. Not because 30 days fixed everything, it didn't. Not because I came out the other side perfectly healed, I didn't. But because those 30 days gave me the single most valuable thing I have ever had. Evidence. Evidence that I was okay without constant contact. Evidence that the world didn't end when I stopped performing. Evidence that peace was real and possible and available to me, not someday, not once everything was resolved, but right now in this body, in this life. Evidence that I deserved to take up space. If you had asked me on day 1 whether I believed that I deserved to take up space, to have my feelings matter, to exist without needing to earn it, I would have said yes. Intellectually, I would have said of course. But I didn't feel it yet. On day 30, I felt it. And that feeling, that is the thing I'm never giving back. Okay, so here's where I want to talk directly to you. If you're watching this right now and you recognize yourself in any part of this story, if your stomach has been tight since the intro, if you've been nodding along to parts of this in a way that feels a little too specific, if you have paused this video to cry or took a screenshot, or are already typing something in the comments, this section is for you. I'm not going to tell you to cut off your family. That's not my place, and it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. But I am going to give you the honest framework that I wish someone had given me before I spent decades trying to earn love from people who had decided how they felt about me before I ever walked into the room. Step 1. Learn to distinguish guilt from intuition. This is the hardest and most important step. Guilt and intuition can feel almost identical in the body. They're both this heavy, pressing sensation that says something is wrong. The difference is what they're pointing toward. Guilt says you are wrong, you are bad, you have done something that requires correction. Intuition says, something in this situation is not right, your well-being is at risk. When you're deeply embedded in a toxic family system, guilt gets weaponized either by other people explicitly, look what you're doing to the family, or by the internalized voices of those people in your own head. The guilt is not true. The guilt is conditioning. And learning to hear the difference, which takes time and often help, is the first step toward making choices that actually serve you. Step 2. You don't owe anyone access to you. Not your parents, not your siblings, not extended family, not anyone. I know how radical that sounds. I know how deeply it cuts against almost everything most of us have been taught about family and obligation and loyalty. But access to your time, your emotional energy, your presence is not something owed. It is something given, and it can be withdrawn when giving it is causing you harm. Setting limits on access is not abandonment, it is not cruelty, it is not throwing family away. It is an act of self-respect, and I want you to hear this, it is often the most honest thing you can do for a relationship. Pretending to be okay when you're not, performing closeness you don't feel, showing up and smiling when you're dying inside, that is the dishonesty. The limit is the truth. Step 3. The reaction to your limit is information. When you set a limit with a healthy person, even an imperfect person who loves you, they might be disappointed. They might need time, they might have questions, but they will ultimately respect it. When you set a limit with someone who is not safe for you, the reaction is often the opposite. Escalation, guilt-tripping, triangulation, anger, telling other family members, framing you as the problem, making it about them. Pay attention to that reaction. Not because it means you should reverse course, but because it tells you something important about what kind of relationship you've actually been in. A person who responds to your request for space with punishment is telling you exactly how much they see you as a person versus how much they see you as a resource. Step 4. Get support outside the family system. This is non-negotiable. When you're inside a system, when it's all you've ever known, it is genuinely impossible to see it clearly on your own. You need an external perspective, therapy if you can access it, a trusted friend who can be honest with you, a support community, books on family systems, codependency, and recovery from emotional neglect. Some books I personally found transformative, and I'll link these in the description. Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay C. Gibson. If you've ever felt vaguely unseen or emotionally alone in your family, even when they were there, this book will put language to something you felt your whole life. Running on Empty by Jonas Webb on emotional neglect specifically, and how its effects are so invisible they can be hard to recognize as harm. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, because the effects of ongoing stress and emotional harm in family systems live in the body, not just the mind, and healing requires addressing both. Step 5. Permit yourself to not have it figured out. You don't have to know right now whether you want no contact forever, or occasional limited contact, or something in between. You don't have to have a plan. You don't have to have a final answer. What you need right now, if you're in this, is permission to stop performing, to stop managing everyone else's feelings at the expense of your own, to stop earning the love that should have been freely given. Even if it's just for 30 days. Especially if it's just for 30 days. Because 30 days might be exactly enough to show you what's possible. I want to go a layer deeper, because I think there's something about this whole experience that I haven't said yet, and it might be the most important thing of all. There's a reason so many people stay in toxic family dynamics long past the point where they can see the harm clearly. Long past the point where they would never tolerate the same behavior from a friend, a colleague, a romantic partner. Long past the point where logic would suggest they should leave. And that reason is not weakness, it's not stupidity, it's not some character flaw. It's love. We stay because we love them. We stay because these are the people who were there at the beginning, who know our whole story, who share our history. We stay because somewhere underneath all the dysfunction is a person, maybe a struggling, wounded, unhealed person, who we remember loving and being loved by. We stay because the hope that it will be different never fully dies. And here is the heartbreaking truth that I had to make peace with. You can love someone and still recognize that a relationship with them is harming you. You can love someone and still choose not to have them in your life. You can love someone and grieve who they could have been, who you deserved them to be, and still walk away. Love is not the problem. Love is never the problem. The problem is when love becomes the justification for accepting harm. When, "but I love them," becomes the reason you override every signal your body is sending you about what this relationship is costing you. Cutting off a toxic family, whether permanently or temporarily, is not the absence of love. For many people, it is the most loving thing they can do. Loving yourself enough to stop the cycle. Loving future generations enough to refuse to pass on what was passed to you. Even loving the people you're stepping back from, because sometimes the most honest thing you can do for a relationship is to stop pretending it's okay when it isn't. I also want to say something about the word toxic, because I think it gets used in ways that can sometimes flatten nuance. Not every difficult family member is toxic. Not every hard relationship is one you should abandon. Families are complicated. People are imperfect. Conflict exists in healthy relationships. Disagreements happen. Sometimes people go through seasons where they're struggling, and they spill that struggle onto people around them. Toxicity, in the way I'm using the word, is a pattern, not a moment. It's a consistent dynamic in which your emotional well-being is consistently sacrificed for someone else's comfort or ego. Its relationships are characterized by control, manipulation, chronic invalidation, or emotional abuse. It's a dynamic where limits are punished, honesty is dangerous, and authenticity is not safe. If that's what you're in, if that description resonates deep in your gut, then what I've shared today is for you. And if you're in a situation that's genuinely ambiguous, messy, and complicated but not clearly harmful, then I'd invite you to get support in figuring out the difference. Because the line between "this is hard but workable" and "this is harming me" can be genuinely difficult to see from inside it. Either way, you deserve to ask the question. You deserve to take it seriously. You deserve to know that your inner life matters, that your peace matters, that who you are when you're not around people who diminish you matters. You deserve to know what it feels like to simply exist without bracing. And if you've never felt that, if peace feels foreign, if rest feels suspicious, if quiet feels uncomfortable, because you've been trained to believe that your value is contingent on your productivity and performance and constant emotional availability, then let me say this. That feeling of peace, it's real, it's available, it's yours. But sometimes you have to get quiet enough to hear it. And sometimes the first step to getting quiet is choosing, deliberately and with full knowledge of how hard it will be, to stop adding to the noise. It started as an experiment, a desperate attempt to hear myself think, a 30-day window to find out whether the person I was inside of that family dynamic was who I actually was, or just who I'd learned to be. And what I found was, she was not who I was. She was the one I had performed for decades to stay safe in an environment that wasn't safe. The real me, the one who emerged in the quiet, was someone I actually liked, someone I wanted to protect, someone who deserved more than I'd been giving her. That's what 30 days gave me. Not a solution, not a perfect ending, not a family that suddenly understood or changed or showed up in the way I'd always needed. Just clarity. And the courage to build my life around it. If you're in a toxic family situation right now, if you've been sitting with this video nodding and fighting tears, I want you to know that you're not alone. What you're feeling is real. The exhaustion is real. The grief is real. The hope for something better is also real, and it is not naive. You are not too sensitive, you are not dramatic, you are not the problem. You are someone who has been trying very hard to love people, who haven't always made it easy to be loved back. And you deserve to rest. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever considered cutting off a toxic family member? Have you done it? Are you thinking about it? Are you in week 1 right now and you needed to hear that the guilt doesn't mean you were wrong? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this video helped you, if it put words to something you've been feeling but couldn't name, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting in their car after a family gathering, crying and wondering if they're crazy. Send it to them. They need to know they're not. I'll see you in the next one.